over to Kristen, who will be introducing Christina today. And thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Christina. And Kristen, take it away.
Right. Good morning, everybody. I am just thrilled to be here today with all of you to introduce my very favorite author, Christina Clancy. Christina's work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Sun magazine, and in literary journals, including Glimmer Train Stories, Hobart, Pleiades, the Minnesota Review, and elsewhere. She has a PhD in creative writing from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She taught English for nearly a decade at Beloit College, where she commuted from her home in Madison, Wisconsin, where she lives with her 6'8" husband, somewhere around there. And she, what was that?
6'6", he's shrinking.
Oh, okay. We're all getting older. And he and the two of them raised two very bright, creative children there. Christina also happens to be my cousin and is otherwise known as Scuzz Cuz. I like to think that her writing foundation was established when we were pen pals in middle and high school, swapping stories about our boy crushes, our annoying siblings, and our moms who just didn't get it. Sorry, Mom. What you might not read, though, in any author bio about Christina is that she is a phenomenal Parcheesi player. She's a killer spin instructor, and she loves to wear star-shaped glasses and sport the comfy. Christina's debut novel, The Second Home, is particularly relevant to me personally because much of the story takes place in the town of Wellfleet on Cape Cod, which is where our family has had a multi-generational home since the 1890s. True, I might be biased because I love my cousin and I love the setting of this book, but I'm not alone in my appreciation. The book was chosen by the American Booksellers Association as an indie next pick for June 2020, and was one of 10 indies introduced titles for the summer and fall of 2020. Zibby Owen selected it as a recommended summer read for Good Morning America, and it received a starred review for Booklist. The novel has been optioned by TriStar for a limited television series, and it's going to be available on paperback on June 8th. And if The Second Home just whet your appetite, you're in luck. Christina's second novel, Shoulder Season, will go on sale July 6th, and you can pre-purchase it. I've already bought my copy.
Nice job, Kristen.
Gotta plug the next one. Amy Meyerson, who's the author of The Bookshop of Yesterdays and The Imperfects, had this to say about Shoulder Season. Expertly researched and flawlessly executed, Shoulder Season has a bit of everything: adventure and excess, love and heartbreak, shocking tragedy. You'll start reading for the wild ride of the Playboy Resort, but stay for Sherry, the complex protagonist at the heart of this exquisite novel. Clancy is a master of place, rendering Wisconsin so vividly that I'm homesick for somewhere I've never been. Shoulder Season tore me apart, then pieced me back together in ways that I wasn't expecting. I'll be thinking about this novel for a long time. And now I'd like to introduce you to this talented writer, Christina Clancy.
Thank you, Scuzz. That's such a nice introduction, and it's so cool to be part of this together. And I mean, whatever I accomplish with writing, it's just nothing compared to what you do with Operation Food Search. I've been volunteering at a food bank here, and it's just incredible. The food insecurity that happens and the work that you do is so important to all the people in St. Louis and beyond. And I'm just so proud of you for working so hard to make everything happen, Scuzz. So
thank you very much.
It's also nice to see Walker's here and Jocelyn and my Aunt Mel and Uncle Bo, who are my greatest fans. So it's really fun to be here, and it's truly an honor. I've heard such great things about the Mirowitz Center, and I heard Chelsea Clinton preceded me. So I've to fill. I wanted to talk today a little bit about, they said I could talk about anything. And because I'm working on a third book right now, I've been thinking a lot about the creative process. And so I thought I'd actually focus my my talk today a little bit on the imagination that I have to use in order to write a book, and how that happens, and how you come up with characters, and how you come up with place. And so I'll talk about that for about 30 minutes. I have a little slideshow. And then I'd love to just have a casual conversation and ask questions. I can answer questions about anything from, if you want to know about what it's like to publish a book, or how the TriStar deal came down for the film, I'm happy to do that. So hope everyone can hear me okay. And thanks for being here. So we have a little slideshow that we can start. Judith's ready.
Can everyone see it?
Yeah, this is great. Thank you. So I talk about the transcendent reach of the imagination, which sounds really important. And, it is kind of interesting to think about how what we write kind of exceeds what conventional life has to offer. You have to create a world that people will want to enter into and find interesting. But where does it all start? And so I'll just begin by saying that the second home, which I never showed you my book. So this is the second home. This is what isn't that a pretty cover? But this is what the second home looks like. And it looks maybe like it's kind of a light book, like it's a summer read, but it gets kind of dark, as some of you who have read it might know. But I wanted to write about a character who I met this woman when I was on vacation with my mom in Panama. And we met a woman who was a surfer, and she had said that she hadn't been home in about a decade. And I couldn't imagine what it was like to not come home for 10 years. And she also said she was still close to her family, which I found really interesting. And about this time, I think my own family, I didn't realize this at the time. Like, now that I do book clubs and I talk about my book, I learn new things about it. And one of the things that I was realizing is that we just recently moved from Madison to Milwaukee, when a lot of the creative work was being done for this. And I think I was thinking about our family and what happens when families change, and my own family changing. And I was worried, if we live in a different city, are we still going to be as close to each other? Like, did we have a good formula when we were in Milwaukee, but will that get disrupted when we move to Madison and have new neighbors and new friends and a new house? And so I think there are all those tensions at work when I was working on the book. So I thought, how do I get this woman home? So that became, and I think a lot of books have a central question. And sometimes you don't know what that question is until you get a little deeper into it. But this one, it became pretty clear. How do I get this character home? And when she goes home, what's going to happen? So home to me became Milwaukee, because I knew that I wanted her to come back to a place that I knew really well, which was the east side of Milwaukee. Although I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second, about the problems of putting her in Milwaukee. But then I also wanted to talk about Cape Cod, or write about Cape Cod, because I love Wellfleet. So Kristen mentioned we have had a house in our family since the 1890s. And when my grandparents passed away, it went to my Aunt Mel and Kristen's family, which is so great. So we've been able to maintain a connection to the place. And I remembered when my grandparents passed away, I was so worried that the house would leave our family. I couldn't imagine feeling like a stranger on that property that we'd spent so much time in, and that was so special to our family. So if you don't mind moving forward on the screen. So there we are, our family in Cape Cod. We had a family reunion a few years ago, and we all came together for it. And really, that's what I wanted to have happen in my novel. I wanted to have a family kind of fall apart and also come back together again. So I think this photo is it's very indicative of like my happiest moment is when I'm with everybody. So in the next slide, there's more family. So this is LeCount Hollow. When I write the book, one of the characters, Poppy, the one who's a surfer, this is what she calls her home beach. So this is where she sets out to learn how to surf for the first time. And here we are with our family when we were having our reunion, and my aunt and uncle, and there's Walker and Kristen and my sister. My sisters aren't in the picture, but they were there, and my mom. And by the way, my mom makes sweaters to match my book covers. So if you have a chance, I just added, it's really funny, I just updated my website, which is ChristinaClancyWrites.com. And I added a page called Tricky Pat, because my mom's nickname is Tricky Pat. And if you go there, you can see the sweaters that match the book covers. So she's with the white hair and the blue vest, sitting in the chair. And then on the next slide, so these are my grandparents. And Mel, this is Warren and Leona Seifert and their dog. I think that's Woody. And this is the house that they've owned since the 1890s. It's changed over the years with additions and changes and so on. And we spent our summers there, but they weren't traditional summer vacations like most people think of when they think of beach vacations. I think because my grandparents retired there and they lived there year round, when we would go visit, we would spend time with them doing volunteer work. Like I remember going on Meals on Wheels rides with my grandparents. I remember going to the meeting volunteer fire department people because my grandfather was active with the fire department. They were active. We'd sit around at the library while they had board meetings. So they were really active. And then my aunt or my grandmother would also visit older people who lived on the Cape. And I think that is how I became really interested in the history of Cape Cod, because a lot of the people that she'd visit had been there for 100 years. And, it was really interesting to hear their stories of what it was like to live there. When we would visit, my mom was a single mom, and she would tell us that, or my grandparents would always tell us that this was her vacation. It wasn't our vacation. And so we would go to the library and get a ton of books. And I think really upstairs, if you look just beyond my grandfather, through that window upstairs, I think that's probably where my love for reading came, it happened, because I would just go through bags and bags of books upstairs in that room. And in the afternoons, we would also just be told not to like bother my mom. And so we wouldn't go to the beach all the time. What my sisters and I would do is we'd go next door to a pre-Revolutionary War house that I'm going to show you some pictures of, that was owned by this woman named Mrs. Andel. So, but this is where it all kind of started. And my grandparents' house is on Drummer Cove, which I'll show you a picture of. So we can go to the next slide. So that's me. And my grandfather was a photographer, a really remarkable photographer. His name is Warren Seifert. And if you go to Cape Cod, you can go to the Wellfleet Historical Museum, which I was sure to include in my book. And you can ask to see his photos. They have files of his photos there. And but he would always take pictures of us, and we were supposed to pretend like we didn't know he was taking pictures. So he was probably in the background kind of humming along. And I think it's pretty appropriate that my family's on this call and that I'm showing you a slideshow, because when we were kids, we'd go to their house and we would watch the slideshows of all the trips that they'd gone on. And my sisters and I thought it was so boring. So I hope I'm not boring you with pictures of our family. So in the next picture, there we are. This is Jeremy Point. I write about Jeremy Point in my book. And I'm in the red checked, well, you can't tell it's red, but it was a red checked outfit. And then my cousin Bob has his hands over his eyes. And then flying the kite is my sister Karen, and that's my mom, and then my little sister Sheila. And that to me is what we wanted to do on Cape Cod. We just loved going to the beach and hanging around and looking for shells. And when you read the book, you'll see the characters wrestle a lot with what the best thing to do is on the Cape. And Maureen, the character, she always has her boys really busy and active, taking tons of classes and so on. And I think there's a sort of sense when you're reading the book that the better way to vacation is to just have a day like this, that's very unstructured, and to just hang out at the beach. So the next slide. And then just another picture of the pier in Wellfleet. And another thing I wanted to talk about is when you write about place, they say everything is political. And I think that one of the things I wanted to address is how places like Wellfleet have changed. And I think especially because of the home rental market, to me, Cape Cod has changed tremendously. And I bet a lot of you who have second homes that are special to you have seen this as well. When I was a kid, people would stay all summer long on the Cape in one house. And now people generally stay for a week, and then there's lots of turnover. And because of that, I think attachments to places change, and the sense of like who carries the history forward is pretty fraught. And so I wanted to talk about that in my book, as this sense of who's a local, who's not a local. I'm really interested in the off season as well. So this picture just kind of typifies what to me it was like when I was a kid. And then just another picture that my grandfather took of the bookstore in Cape Cod. And I just love the quality of this book. It kind of who knew when I was a kid and I saw this picture that it would mean so much to me to see a bookstore. And Left Bank Books in St. Louis, by the way, has been fantastic in supporting my book. And so the next slide. And then if you've ever been to Wellfleet, some of you might remember Captain Higgins. This is a photograph my grandfather took that is on the marsh and when you're in town. And it used to, these structures have moved because of erosion over the years. So this is where Captain Higgins was when I was a kid. And now there's a restaurant called the Pearl that I think is where Captain Higgins used to be. I'm sure that my family can correct me on the location of this. But I love this photo, that kind of like stillness in the bay. So we can move on to the next one. And just one more photo, I promise this is it. But this is me kind of daydreaming. And I included this photo here because I included this photo because I think this is just what it was like when you're a kid. You just have so much time and you could be bored and you could use your imagination. And that's kind of what it's like to write. You kind of need to indulge your imagination and just kind of let it go and go to different places and think about possibilities, dramatic possibilities for your story. So you can see that kind of taking root even when I was a little girl, wearing a turtleneck on the beach. So I love this phrase, you write what you know, but you also write what you need to find out. I think that's so true. And I think a lot of writers, and including myself, when you first start, you're really torn trying to figure out how much you should write about your own life. And that's what I want to talk about a lot today, and how much you should use your imagination. And one thing that I've found is that when you write, I like writing without having too much of an outline, because I feel like it gives you a better opportunity to explore regions of your thinking that you might not otherwise get to. And it allows you to have the capacity for surprise. I don't want to give too much away, but there's a part of the book where there's a character named Anthony who's awful. And at one point he walks up the stairs in a huff. And those of you who read the book will know what happened, but I did not know that was going to happen. And it was so weird because when I wrote it, I gasped and I kind of sat back from my keyboard and I thought, how did that happen? And I think of that moment a lot with writing, that when you don't know exactly what's going to happen, in some ways it gives you a little bit of leeway to allow things to happen that the characters kind of push forward. And you get to know what the characters' motives and inspirations are when you're working by just giving them a little bit more room to move around and do things and explore. So it's really fun when you write that way. I really like that element of surprise where I can surprise myself. And I do think, though, it's on my second book, I had only a year to write it. And that was really stressful because I couldn't just run like free range writing as much as I did with the second home. And one other thing about the early drafts of writing what you know, but also writing what you need to find out is with the first book, I think I had all the time in the world and I could put it away in a drawer for a couple of years and without feeling that pressure to write. And that was, I hope writers, if you're an aspiring writer on this call, you can, take hope from knowing that you can trust the process a little bit. So. Okay, so what is this picture doing here? The reason I wrote about this, or I included this, is because I was thinking about all the times with my imagination when I needed to give myself permission to explore different avenues for writing this book. So there's a short story that's really famous by Joyce Carol Oates called "Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been?" And if you haven't read it, it's really an interesting story. And I've taught it so much when I was teaching at Beloit College. And it's the story of this woman, Connie, who is, she's trying to cross all sorts of thresholds. In fact, I usually teach it thinking about like, where do you see lines, dichotomies in this story between good and bad, dark and light, and so on. And the reason I wanted to talk about this story is because I was thinking about early in the drafting process of my book, I was thinking about where to set the book. And I originally was writing this story where my character went back to Evanston, Illinois. which is so random because I don't know Evanston, Illinois very well. And I was thinking that it was sort of like Milwaukee's north side or east side. It was, it was north of Chicago. It had kind of the same mix. It had some hippies, it had, some intellectuals, it had university, but it wasn't quite right. And so if you go to the next slide, I saw Joyce Carol Oates read this story called Pumpkinhead at a conference that she gave. And it was, I think this is maybe from 2008 from the New Yorker. And I'll just read this excerpt. He stared into the long, beautifully furnished room with a shoulder-high stone fireplace at its far end, book-filled shelves, Chinese carpets on a gleaming hardwood floor. Above the fireplace hung an impressionist Wolfcon landscape of gorgeous pastel colors. So that's a little excerpt. So what happened after she read the story, somebody in the audience raised their hand and said, that your living room is so clearly evoked. Like, this is just part of it. There's more descriptions of it. And Joyce Carol, I don't know if you've ever seen her live. She's very serious, but she looked up and she just said, well, that's my living room. And I couldn't believe that, because I thought, oh, you can do that. You can write a book in a place or a story in a place that And it was so, I practically like skipped home that night because I thought my characters are going to move to the east side of Milwaukee. That's a place that I know. It's a place I love. I can totally imagine them there. And not only that, I'm going to take them to Wellfleet and write about another place that I know and love. And so I then had this challenge of how much do I want to write about a place that I'm imagining, and how much do I want to write about a place that's real, and where does that line get crossed? And this is something that I face in all my writing, because I like to write things that are centered on place. And so my next book is set in an old Playboy resort. And then the book I'm working on right now is set in a lakeside community called Congress Club. So I'm still wrestling with this question of how true do I need to be to what this place actually is, and how much should I change it? So if you want to go to the next slide. I read this essay. It's in the most recent version of the New Yorker. It's so interesting. I love Joan Didion, and I bet a lot of you do too. And the writer was talking about Joan Didion's heroic particularism, which I thought was so interesting. But she said, when I talk about pictures in my mind, I am talking quite specifically about images that shimmer around the edges. The picture tells you how to arrange the words, and the arrangement of the words tells you, or tells me, what's going on in the picture. And then I love this other line from that article. I wanted not a window on the world, but the world itself. I wanted everything in the picture. And that struck me because when you're writing about a place that's real to you, you feel like, how do I limit what I'm going to share? How do I convey the sense of what a place is like to the reader as much as I possibly can, but also maybe invite them into my imagination as well. And they talk about how Didion writes like a filmmaker, where everything's kind of like different scenes that happen. And so this is something that I wrestled with when I was working on my story, is how can I share with you what it's actually really like to be in this place, knowing that you're going to have your own experience. So we can go to the next slide. It's a really great essay on Joan Didion. So which brings me to The Dutch House, which I don't know if you guys have read Ann Patchett's book, The Dutch House, but this is just a little excerpt from that. She says, maybe a few pieces of furniture had been rearranged, reupholstered, replaced. Who could remember? There were the silk drapes, the yellow silk chairs, the Dutch book still in the glass-fronted secretary, reaching up and up towards the ceiling, forever unread. Even the silver cigarette boxes were there, polished and waiting on the end tables, just as they had been when the Van Hobecks walked the earth. So I bring up The Dutch House because I saw Ann Patchett. We actually did an event with her at this bookstore in Wisconsin called Inklink. And she said something that blew me away. She said that when she wrote the book, she said, if you really count, I think she said there were only 9 actual concrete examples of something from the house. And I couldn't believe it, because in my head, I had such a clear picture of what that house would look like. And it kind of looked maybe a little bit like this picture. But even when I was getting this slide together, I was Googling the Dutch House, and I was looking at how different people had rendered what the Dutch House might have looked like. and it's wildly different. Maybe you have, thought of Dutch houses as like a barn style structure, like the Dutch barn, the Dutch door. So if you read the book, I just think it's fascinating to think that she anchors that house with just a few specific details that she goes back to again and again until they become comfortable for the reader. And you almost feel like you've been in that house because you start recognizing things. And I think that parts of homes or anything physical in a book, if you read Jane Hamilton's book, Some Luck, she talks about the August Osage tree that's always, or the Osage tree that's always outside of the farm that she writes about. And she brings it to mind for the reader so many times that by the time you read it, you feel like it's yours, like it's part of your home. So I think that it's really interesting with my book to think of which sort of details do I write about for the house to make the house seem real to the reader. But I also kind of wanted to throw the reader off a little bit. So we can go to the next slide. And then I just thought this was kind of an interesting, I'm not saying I'm a creative genius, don't worry. But I like this idea. It kind of, harkens back to what Ann Patchett was saying, where she just has a few details, but she says creative genius is the ability to create new unity out of existing things. So I think that if you just can, maybe it'd be fun if you wanted to have a writing exercise for yourself to take like 7 or 8 or 9 items from your home and try to write a story around those items and see how those things create some sort of unity. It's kind of interesting to see how you kind of leapfrog imaginatively from one concrete thing to the next, and you start filling in the details, and that's where like your imagination and the reader's imagination kind of find some sort of point of connection. So you can go to the next slide. So I just thought this was kind of interesting, not to be too professory, but I thought it was just thinking about imagination, because whenever I talk to book clubs, they will always ask me like, how did you come up with this? How does your imagination work? And we all have imaginations, but it's sometimes interesting to think about how to break down the imaginative process. So this primary imagination is the faculty by which all human beings shape their experience of the world into meaningful perception. And then secondary imagination is the artist's ability to create new shapes and meaning out of existing material, which is what I was doing. I was working with existing material. And then Samuel Coleridge, who's one of my favorite poets, he said, an idea cannot be conveyed but by a symbol. And by symbol, I'm thinking about like Ann Patchett saying there's 8 or 9 things in the book that she wrote where she was drawing attention to those things, and they start to carry a symbolic load. Symbols are the living edicts of the imagination, of that reconciling and meditatory power, which incorporating the reason and images of the sense gives birth to a system of symbols, harmonious in themselves. And I don't know what that word is. I'm sorry. I think I mistyped that, but I like that, consubstantial with the truths of which they are the conductors. So, it's what you're trying to do is fuse together all these different symbols and ideas that start carrying a load. And if you read the book, The Second Home, you'll see that there are certain things in the book that become really, really important that I come back to again and again. And those become the symbols that do a lot of work for me. They create the tone and the tenor and become kind of emotional signposts for readers. So the next page. So, I was just thinking also about house as a metaphor. So we talk about writing about real things, and obviously the house is loaded. And there's a line in the book where I think it's Anne who says, what houses but containers for memories? And if the houses go away, what happens to the memories? Like, do they just scatter around the world and like kind of lose their shape and form when the houses go away? And I think most of us who have ever left a house, a childhood home, or maybe you've gotten divorced, or you've had your parents' home that you've sold. In fact, we just did that with my husband's parents' houses. You realize how meaningful homes are. So our lives are liberated or limited by the spaces we inhabit and how we imagine them. And memories obviously make homes homes. I think without homes, you don't have the memories. And that kind of goes back to this idea of the Airbnbs on Cape Cod, when people are just there for a week and they just have that week-long memory instead of more memories. Like with our family home, does that make it less of a home? So that's just something to think about, and that I kind of address in the book. And then also, I think there's a sense of nostalgia with homes. I love writing about houses because we expect them to stay static. We don't want them to change, yet houses and everything has to change. So that's something that I was kind of exploring with the book. And you'll see towards the end of the second home, the characters have more agency to start changing them. And that's kind of that next generation putting their mark on the home, changing the paint color, changing the furniture out. But it can be really hard to do that because you associate certain types of furniture with a home, certain paint colors and so on. So we can go to the next slide. So this is a house. I'm sorry, it's a little bit crooked. I was trying to straighten it up, but it actually is kind of interesting that it is, because this is what my mom and I, when the book was coming out, I said, Mom, let's go drive around the east side of Milwaukee and find the Gordon's house. In my mind, I had a city block. I thought it would, if you guys know Milwaukee at all, I thought it was on Kramer Street, just off Newberry. And I knew that was where the Gordons lived. Their house had a turret, and it had to, there are a lot of duplexes, but I imagined a single family home. And so I said, let's go find the Gordon house. And we drove down that block and it wasn't there. And I was like, well, oh, how could that not be there? I imagine their house so vividly, being on this exact block. So we drove around and we just couldn't find it. We'd find something close. And then just the other day I was in Milwaukee and I was driving around and my son was in the car, and I stopped the car right away. And I said, Timmy, get a camera, get my phone and take a picture of this house. This is the Gordon's house. So it's so funny to see something that looked exactly the way I imagined it to be. Even the doors on the right side, like I just imagined I could see that room on the second floor could have been Ed and Connie's bedroom. So I just thought I'd show what the Milwaukee house is. I give so much of this talk to Cape Cod because that house is so, it's probably the primary house in the book, but the Gordon's house in Milwaukee is also important. And so now I'll show you some pictures of Cape Cod and the actual house that I wrote. And I'm hesitant to do so because of what I was talking about with imagination, because you may read the book and imagine the house looking a different way than it actually is, but maybe it's kind of fun too to see what it actually looks like. So this is Drummer Cove, and this is a view from my aunt and uncle's house. And this is high tide. And usually it doesn't look like this though. High tide doesn't last very long, and then it drains out and becomes a mud flat. And in the book, I talk about how Anne thinks of the cove as being like quicksand, like real quicksand that you can drown in and that deer get stuck in. We actually were there when it was fall, I think, and a deer had gotten stuck in the quicksand, and they had to have a helicopter come pull the deer out of the middle of the cove, which I thought was really pretty dramatic. And but this is what the family loves. And one thing that I always see when I look at this picture, and I wonder if Kristen or my aunt and uncle feel this, I'm super afraid of ticks. I have a tick phobia. So like for me, I look at this picture and I think, oh, that's so beautiful. I wonder if there are ticks. So it's, and Anne gets a little line in about ticks in this story. So we go to the next slide. So this is what I wanted for the cover of my book, because I kind of thought the house looked like this Edward Hopper painting. And I sent it to my publisher. I've actually become friends with my cover designer. And when I went to New York and I met her, she said, I went to the meeting and I said, there will not be a house on the cover of your book. I was like, okay, because I had sent this. I love the colors. I loved everything about it. And it does to me look like the house. But in some ways, I really appreciate what she was saying, because she was getting at this whole idea of what's real and what's imagined. And the minute you have this picture of what this house looks like, the reader is going to think of the house looking like this. The other reason I'm happy she didn't do this is because I didn't necessarily want the woman who owns the house now that I based the book on to have people know that it's actually her house. When I was working on the book, I don't know that she thought that I'd actually publish it. And, she's like, oh, Christy, that's wonderful. You're working on a book. And then when it actually got published, I was like, oh no, it's really easy to know. If you know Wellfleet, there's not that many houses that are on Route 6 that are also on the Cove. And was really scared that she'd be mad or that she'd want me to change the location. And I was like, how could I do that? Like, I don't know how this house could exist anywhere else. So I'd throw in some curveballs for the reader. Like I would describe it as a salt box, and this is not a salt box, but I did that so that the readers might not know that that's the actual house. And I also didn't want my aunt to have people driving up her driveway to like look for the house, because it's pretty clear it's probably right. You know, there's no secrets really. So fortunately, the woman who lives in the house is thrilled that the book is about her house, and she's not shy about it at all. But I was really nervous, like really, really nervous. It took me like a week to tell her that the book was going to be published. And but it's fun that she's embraced it. And I think I've added to her home value a little bit. Here's the actual house. And these are photos that it's still, I'm actually throwing curveballs because the house has changed a little bit with a new owner. She's made updates. And these are pictures from when Mrs. Andel, the older lady who lived there, who would entertain my sisters and I in the afternoons. These are pictures that were taken when she was there. But I just kind of love the way that you can see that some of the things I work with the book, like having some shading around the house. I kind of wanted like a gauzy, dreamy feel to be outside. And I don't describe the outside of the house a ton because I want it to feel kind of like a dream in the book. And the little door to the shed that's attached to the house, that's the bean pot cellar. So if you've been to old New England homes, the cellars are kind of creepy and they're shaped like a half circle. And that's the door that opens to that. So you can go to the next. And then this is the living room. And this picture throws me off because I thought I remembered when I was writing the book, it was very much in this room. You know, there's so much that happens with in the keeping room with the birthing rooms, those little windows above the doors, the cabinets next to the fireplace where they used to bake bread. To the right of that fireplace is where the games would have been. And to me, the game cabinet is the beating heart of my book. I think it's so important because it represents time and togetherness, because that's what, you know, when you spend time together, that's what you're doing. And then on the other side, if for those, I don't want to give away too much of the book, but I talk about people used to hide in the houses. And so to the left of that fireplace, there's a hiding place that a person could fit into. So that's the house. And I thought that there was wallpaper on the walls, and there wasn't. And in my head, I thought, how could that be? How could I misremember that? But of course, writing is all about memory, and we misremember things all the time. So we can go to the next page. This is the little porch outside, and there's a lot of scenes with Michael where he's on that porch. And I transposed some actual furniture that was there and furniture that I imagined would be there. So I imagined that pea green couch with the vinyl. And I don't know if that's real or not. I don't know if that was actually there or if it's something that I imagined. But you can see also to the right on where the yellow cabinets are is that wild wallpaper. And I definitely included a lot of wild wallpaper in the book. And if we go back just for a second. There we go. See all the books in that bookcase? Those are Connie's books. Like now when I look at this, I feel like the Gordons live in this house. It's so weird how their spirits are kind of in there for me. And I definitely remembered that bookcase with all of Connie's books, and Michael leaves little notes and stuff in it. So that's the bookcase that I imagined. So we can go on to the next one. And then this is the room with the beds that stick out of the walls like piano keys. This is not the actual room though that I imagined, because this one's upstairs from the room that I didn't write about this room at all because we were never allowed to go in it. And I felt like the whole upstairs of Mrs. Andel's house was really secret. So the downstairs had beds just like this with a blue wall, but I don't have a picture of that. But this is kind of that feeling of that house. I think so much of that like the gauziness of the curtains, the light coming through, it's really peaceful. So that's something that I wanted to write about. And there's just a few more images and then we can have the Q&A. So this is, I think some people might think it's mean that I reconciled Michael to the attic, but I loved this room again because it was secret. We weren't really allowed to go up there. And we found a pile of old newspapers from the 40s when we were there once. And we thought that was so enchanted that there are all these old newspapers. And it felt like, again, since we weren't really supposed to go up in this room, like it was really special. And there's stairs, and you can kind of see the leading up to the landing. Those are the captain's stairs at the very beginning that Michael's going to walk up. And when we were kids, Mrs. Andel would tell us that Clarence, who lived in the house before her, that his ghost lived in the house, and that he would rattle around up there and knock on the door where the stairs were. So this also feels like it's a place where ghosts live. And Clarence has quite a colorful history. He hid the cannon that was found in their yard that's now in front of the Wellfleet Town Hall. It had been missing for 50 or 60 years, I think, before his daughter told the town where the cannon was hidden. And so that's a pretty cool bit of history from that area. And then this is the barn. Again, speaking about imagination, this is how the barn exists in my memory. It's not there anymore. It's torn down. And but I remember they used to have fish or lobster traps up on the ceiling. And the barn, again, was kind of forbidden. There were lots of tools there. And that barn has a really significant part to play in the book. And it's kind of interesting to see that it's not, I actually had kind of forgotten what the actual barn looked like until I saw this photo, and it was a little different than my memory. But I also remember my great aunt Nellie's couch had been in that barn, and we thought it was really interesting that my grandparents' relatives had not hidden, but kept some of their furniture there. And then this is second to last slide. This is the captain's stairs. So if you've never been in an old New England house, some of the stairs are so narrow, and you don't really get a sense of it from looking at this picture, but you can just basically get the ball of your foot on those stairs. They're not ADA compliant at all. So, and then finally, Duck Pond, which is a really special place, and it plays a really prominent role in the book. And again, I'm a little nervous to share this because I don't want to superimpose my idea of what it looks like on the imagination of the reader. But a lot of you, if you've read the book, there's something really traumatic that happens on Duck Pond. And I feel so guilty about kind of desecrating this amazing, beautiful, special place in my novel. But if you look across the pond, you'll see there's a house. And I say that the house was like it had eyes in this really difficult scene that I had to write. And that's the house that's there. It's the only house on the pond. And to me, that house is like the most enchanted place in the world. I've always just thought it was so special. And in the summers we'll swim over to one side. And as soon as we start getting close to it, I freak out. Like I feel like I have no business being here, and I'll turn around. But that's Duck Pond. So that is what I wanted to talk about with the images that I was working with and the place that I was working with, and how I describe them. And I'm curious if you've thought it looked the way it does in the book in real life.
So if anyone has any questions, you can unmute or type in the chat, raise your hand, however you would like to.
I would love to kick us off. Christy, that was so neat to see the inspiration for all those locations.
Oh, thanks, Jocelyn.
And it's great to hear about the process. It's so interesting because it's making me realize that, that whole concept of something becoming something else once the reader has it. Because to me, I love that you were so respectful of the actual place and the actual people. But to me, it doesn't feel like that much of a danger because I took those things and created my own version of them. So it became something else, So it was just interesting to reflect on that as you were going through the pictures. But I would love to hear, have you shared these pictures with the production company, and maybe tell us more about the TV deal?
Oh, sure. Well, so it was really funny. So the TV deal is, and it'll be so interesting to see how they actually visualize it. Like this will be really real if it ever gets made. Sometimes you sell an option and it doesn't happen. But I was on a call with the producer at TriStar, And we were talking about how it would get made and where they'd film it. And, you know, and I said, it would be so great if you could find, she said that they were hiring a writer for it. And people have asked if I'd want to write the screenplay. I have no interest. Like, I'd much rather spend my time working on another book than to do that. And I said, oh, it'd be so great if you found someone who knows Cape Cod who could write about it. And she laughed and she said, we could set this in Hawaii. It was like, oh, I felt like someone tore my heart out of my chest. I was like, what? But really with TV, they can do anything with it. And I have absolutely no say. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I'm not supposed to publicly like post about this, but I can tell you guys that with the TV deal. So how it came down is a celebrity actually read my book, which is so weird to think when it's out there in the world that somebody who's super famous would read it. And he was in the show Game of Thrones. So I don't know if you guys have watched Game of Thrones, but he has like 3 million Instagram followers, but his name is Nikolai Coster-Waldau. And he wants to play Anthony, and Anthony's the villain. So I couldn't believe that he would want to play this horrible person, but he's wants to produce and star in it. So it may not get made, but I've heard it helps a lot if you have a star attached. So maybe that'll help a lot. And TriStar's they call themselves like a boutique production company. So they like taking on kind of more like bigger projects, like the Big Little Lies and so on, like kind of that have some literary merit to them. So we'll see. I don't know. Hopefully it's very slow. It's nothing to get excited about. Like they'll tell you, and then 4 months later, you'll get an email. And then 4 months later, you'll hear something more. But now my second book, I'm trying to, I have a film agent and he's trying to get that out. But the timing is really delicate because you want a friend of mine who does this for a living, she works for Steph Curry. He has a production company. And she said, you want to be able to be one of the first people to know about a book, but also you don't want it to be too close to when or too far away from when it's coming out. Because if somebody doesn't like it, it can create some bad, like there'll be a bad juju around it. So you don't want people saying bad things about a book either before it comes out. So I don't know, we'll see. But I did picture it as a film for sure. It feels very cinematic. And my second book about the Playboy Resort. So I'll just talk about that just for a second. So this is shoulder season. And this book is, so I could not believe it in 1981, or in the whole 70s, from 1968 to 1981 or 82, there's different accounts of when it closed. Hugh Hefner had run a Playboy Resort in Wisconsin, which to me just seemed totally insane. I had no idea that there was a Playboy Resort there. And so I started interviewing former Playboy bunnies. And that book, again, is really a book about plays. It'll be marketed as a Playboy book, but really I was more interested in what it would be like to be from the small town of East Troy, where we have a cottage, and suddenly have the world like come to you in the form of like Hugh Hefner and all these celebrities. And there's also a music amphitheater there where my other cousin Wendy and I go see Dave Matthews Band. So all these celebrities were there. That's where Stevie Ray Vaughan was killed when his helicopter hit the bluff. So I wanted to explore that in that book. And that feels super cinematic to me. I mean, Playboy girls from Wisconsin, like it's just, they didn't even have to really be beautiful. They just had to be thin and they had to be super outgoing. And they marketed the Playboy Resort as a family resort, which kind of blows me away. So it was really interesting to write. And I just can totally see it as a film with Bernadette Peters in it. Yeah, Susan.
So I have a question. When you write and you have a block and you're not sure where you're going to go next with your story, what do you do?
That's such a good question because I'm writing right now and I've been blocked lately. So I feel like you're kind of seeing right into my life. But often it's funny, I actually go to the place that I'm writing about. So yesterday, my new book is set on Lake Geneva. The world's largest refracting telescope is there in this place called Yerkes Observatory. So I went with my mom to go on a tour inside. They're remodeling it right now. And it just, all of a sudden it broke everything loose. Like I got a lot of story ideas from one line. The woman who showed us around, she was talking about what a mess the place had been after all these years of nobody really fixing it up. And she said, astronomers are pack rats. They never throw anything away. And my story was kind of hinging originally on somebody in the present day finding something from the past and trying to figure out how it got there. And I was like, oh, I can move this to the observatory instead of having found it in the water. And then we understand like why this character would keep it, because astronomers never throw anything away. So it's from 1927, but that like, it gave me a new avenue that I could go down that kind of unblocked the one that was not productive before. Another thing I do is I put it away for a while. I don't know if that's good advice though. You know, I think like Jocelyn's a writer. I don't know if you've had this experience. Like sometimes I think you can put it away and then go for a walk and like think about it, and maybe something will rattle free. But then I've also found that just getting like forcing yourself to be engaged in your manuscript and keep your head in the story can open up ways for the story to work too. So much of it, you just have to have the story in your head. If you're too distanced from it, it's hard to access it. Like the feelings, the characters, everything about it. With the second home, when I was working on my edits for my editor and she would send me the manuscript, I was so engaged in it. Like because I just had, my head was so in it. My editor had said, why don't you add some surprises towards the end? And I'd been thinking about it so much. It was really easy for me to do that. It was actually the most fun I ever had writing, because I thought, I know these characters. I know the place they're in. I can smell the salt air. I can imagine everything that would happen or how they behave. So that kind of helped too. So maybe finding some balance between distancing yourself, then also getting back in. Another thing I do is I don't get right out of bed when I wake up. I always stay in bed for an extra 20 minutes. And I use that time to think about my manuscript, to just think, okay, what's going to happen? What's next? So that helps me imagine them and, you know, again, like take up real estate in my brain so that I can access that more readily when I open my document.
I have a related question, sort of related, but just in terms of, you know, thinking about writing blocks, and how difficult is it to be working on two things at the same time? Or do you ever do that? Do you have a short story you're working on at the same time that you're working on a novel?
I love that question because I used to multitask more. I can't now. I really don't like have it being pulled away from the novel. And I actually find it hard to read other people's books when I'm writing, because I mimic, like I think I mimic people's voices, and I'll try to write the way they write, or I'll get jealous of the way they constructed something. And I remember I was working on a really early draft of a story or of a book that never came to anything. And I started reading Nora Ephron, and I thought, oh, it's so cool how her characters go on tangents all the time. And I tried writing tangents, and it was a disaster. Like she could pull that off, but I couldn't at all. Like I needed to keep my character focused on one thing. So I think that, you know, it's really important to just kind of stay focused on one thing. And also switching to essays is one thing that I will do to work on two different things at once. Because sometimes I think switching to nonfiction, it doesn't feel like it's using the same kind of energy or muscles that I need to write fiction. So I'll probably need to write some nonfiction essays to go with my two books that are coming. Like the paperback comes out on June 8th of Second Home, and then my other book comes out in July. So I'll probably start writing some companion pieces. And in fact, if you guys have any ideas, I kind of want to write about how, so in my book about the Playboy bunnies, you know, it's set mostly in 1981, and it follows a character. And I've been thinking about heroines and how we expect too much of female heroines. And, you know, like if you watch Queen's Gambit, that character has to become a world chess champion in order to be redeemed in the eyes of the reader. And I think there are everyday kinds of women who don't necessarily achieve heroic ends, but their journey is something that we can relate to. And I kind of am interested in thinking about, like, do we expect too much of female heroines in literature and on film? And how can more everyday women be represented without being seen as like unlikable or unremarkable? And I think we have a different standard for female characters than we do for male. So if you have thoughts about that or examples, like I would just love to hear them. So everyone here knows how to reach me. So send me an email because I'd love that.
So
have
what do you
any
mean
other
with, you said you're gonna have essays that accompany the book? Like, are they gonna be related to, or explain that?
Yeah, so my publicist will probably want me to write essays to appear in like the New York Times or the Washington Post that have some sort of topic that's similar to the book. So that readers will see that and then they'll see, oh, she's the writer of this book. Like this is like, I can write about female heroines because I'm writing a book about Playboy bunnies from the 80s. And maybe they'll think, oh, this, I like this essay. Maybe I want to read this. So it's kind of a sales vehicle. My friend Lauren Fox, she just has a book that just came out then for me that is the Jenna Bush Hager pick. She's going to be on the Today Show on Friday and she's already so nervous. But she was, before her book came out, she had to write some essays. So she started writing about like trauma and how it carries across generations. And that's related to her book. So they try to have writers do that. They don't always get picked up. Last year, because my book came out right after the riots and during a social media blackout for Black Lives Matter, it was like there was no way I was going to place an essay. Like nobody wanted to read about a house in Cape Cod that time. Although now, like second homes, I think this summer will be really relevant after COVID. Like, what's a second home anymore? You know,
Yeah.
people have been living in their second home, so that could potentially be a good essay for me to try to pitch. Any ideas? Share them. I'll need
Yeah,
them.
and what you said about being, what does it mean to be a local since people aren't sort of staying in places as long?
Yeah, and leaving
know.
places, like moving from San Francisco because of cost of living and people are living in places like Madison. Madison, I guess, where I live, Madison, Wisconsin, is the number one smaller town that people are moving to right now, which is interesting. Real estate here is insane because everyone's leaving big cities.
Christina,
So.
thank you so very much. I'm not sure if we have any other questions today, but we are close to time. So if we do have any questions, let's go ahead and no questions. Okay. So it was a wonderful to hear about your book, and you shared some wonderful pictures, and just the pictures alone and your details that you described in your book already, intrigued my imagination. So
Oh,
thank
great.
you
Well,
so much. We
thank
really
you.
appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you. And thanks for the Mirowitz Center. And thank you, Cuz. And thanks for all of you for spending your time doing this. I know we're all on a lot of Zooms, so it means a lot to me that you're here.
Looking forward to reading your book.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.